Welcome back. It is episode 152. I'm your host, Jacob Harris, and this podcast is brought to you by Achievement Apex, Power Pit Rockingham, Pet Test Australia, and Bulk Gym Chalk. Today, I'm joined by Benny Price once again. Thank you for being here, sir.
Thank you for having me. It's kind of crazy that I've managed to make it to this chair, or not this one in particular. It was a slightly different chair last time, but this zone twice. It's twice in a year, mate.
Yes. Yeah, wow. So when were you here last?
January.
And then before that, December again? Because that's where we did this a year ago, or?
No, we did this 11 months ago, the first time round. January 2024.
I thought we did it, for some reason, thought we'd done it around December. I don't know why.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
it was. January is around December.
It is close.
It's quite close. It's almost as close as you can get to December. November might have something to say about that, but otherwise, yeah.
Yeah. Wow, my memory is shocking. Well, let's segue into something smart because you've got plenty of those things to say. We did you presented the level 1 course again today. It was good to watch you again in action, and there's a couple of things that came up. So I have some questions.
Hit me.
One of the things that you mentioned, or one of the things that was brought up, you were talking about chest flies. We were talking about how maybe dumbbell chest flies, well, not maybe, but dumbbell chest flies in terms of their resistance profile aren't the greatest compared to maybe like some cable chest flies that are a little bit better in that way. I was interested in this because then they brought up the sliders and we started like talking about TRXs. I'm curious as to some of these things because it always makes my brain associate different things that aren't to do with the machines we're talking about or cables. And immediately what I thought about was, are you familiar with a move called a planche?
No, sounds like it's ballet related.
Gymnastics, yeah.
Ah, okay.
Have you ever seen anything before where someone will spread their hands out far, like quite far, and they'll straighten their arms as much as they can and like have their feet off the ground?
Yeah.
Straighten their entire body out. And they do similar things to this, like Victorian cross. Are you familiar with Victorian cross?
I'm not.
In gymnastics, you would have seen them do it where they'll straighten their arms out by their sides and keep their bodies level, like as if they're doing like a lateral raise.
Yep.
And I always find this sort of stuff like really interesting because when we did the course and like when I'm watching you talk about things again, as soon as you start to look at sports and like other things where they're doing movements like this, dirt bike riding or like freestyle motocross, the things that they do, all of it really goes against a lot of what you would consider optimal, right? Like in gymnastics, you're like, that's probably not a great thing to do for your shoulders. And they may end up with issues later and stuff like that. But some people will use that as an argument against what you're saying, right? And this is probably the most common one with biomechanics. Well, these other people are doing it this way. And if your way was perfect, then how can they do that? And how are they so strong? And how have they built so much muscle? And so I was kind of curious to like maybe what your response would be to that when it comes to something like that, because you've got the explanation of to like what would be optimal if we're training, but in that case, it's harder to dispute maybe. And I'm curious as to like what you would respond to someone with if they were to bring up that point, like, hey, look at this gymnastics or these people doing this that goes against what you've just said.
I think the key thing for us to understand here, or for us to set, is what we're defining as being optimal. So when we're in the gym, and people go to the gym for different reasons, right? If someone goes to the gym to get better at gymnastics, they might have a different perception. That goal might change the way that we investigate optimizing something relative to someone who goes to the gym in order to improve the health of their joints and the function of the things that move them, i.e. their muscles, and potentially, achieve an ideal or as good a ratio of sort of stimulus to tax that we're taking on in the process of achieving it as possible. And so if we, for example, took dumbbell flies and we went, well, the only reason a dumbbell fly would really make much sense is if we only had dumbbells that went up to 10 kilos, and it got to the point where pressing them was too light for us to keep receiving sufficient stimulus to see an adaptation. So we'd start going, well, I can't increase the load, the resistance. So what I'm going to have to do is start taking that and putting it further and further away from my joint in order to increase the torque requirements of my joint, and as a result, the amount that the muscles that are going to move my joints have to contract, and the amount of tension that's going to be put through them in order to move the dumbbells. But in terms of the relationship between dumbbell flies and dumbbell presses, there's this weird thing that takes place in terms of the physics within a joint and the forces that are taking place within a joint, where the further away that weight is, even though it's lighter, it actually puts more stress on the joint to move a light weight that's far away than it does to move a heavy weight that's close. I know, it's a complete mind bender. It doesn't make any sense if you're just thinking about, well, surely something heavier is stressing out my joint more. It's just not the case, because the distance makes a big difference, because there's this like relative distance of your muscles relative to your joint and the weight relative to your joint. There's all sorts of funky stuff that's happening there. And so from a joint forces perspective, pressing heavy, it makes more sense than doing flies far apart. And the reason why a lot of people might choose to do flies is when you press like dumbbells, just doing a dumbbell press, you don't really get any challenge at the top, because the weight's kind of stacked over the joints. And you're not getting any challenge in this process of sort of like horizontally adducting your shoulders and squeezing the shortened range of your pecs. And you're only really getting much of a challenge at the bottom. And if we used cables, we'd achieve that challenge in the middle, right? Because there's a different direction of resistance that's sort of pulling us outwards. So we get to a bit of challenge pulling inwards. But with dumbbell flies, we don't get that. And so it's, if we've got the option to do pressing with something heavy or do flies with something light, and it's not giving me, like my pecs don't know the difference, right? Between a fly, where I'm going to end up in the same top position as a press, I end up in the same top position. And so if my pecs don't know the difference, they're not getting any more novel stimulus. But my shoulders are going to get more stress from using the light weight in a fly as opposed to using a heavy weight in a press. From an optimization perspective, in terms of I've come to the gym to get as much stimulus to those muscles with as little tax to the joints that are articulating when I contract them as possible, it's not very logical to do a dumbbell fly. So that, and because that is how we're defining optimization in the gym surrounding, where someone has come in purely for this increased and improved internal performance and health, right? They want those things to be stronger and bigger potentially, and maybe look better. But you know, the health outcomes of having more muscle mass and the correlation between sort of being healthier and more functional for longer, pretty good, right? From what we understand. So that could be a good reason to try and grow those things and make them stronger. And the fact that they move our joints makes them better at doing so. But then I'd rather not beat the crap out of the stuff that has to move in the process. Because a lot of people that have pain that restricts them from being mobile and restricts them from being able to keep staying active when they're older and keep having a good quality of life, it's probably most of the time the joints, right? The stuff that keeps everything together just has taken a bit of a battering over the course of whatever they've done in their lives. And a lot of the time that is sport. Sport doesn't make a whole lot of sense, particularly if you look at sports like jiu-jitsu, where the whole point of the sport is to take the other person and put them in their joints in a position that it hates. It hates so much and it hurts so much that they tell you to stop. That's how you win at jiu-jitsu. So from a joint health perspective, not particularly logical. And if you look at any of the other sports that we might play, if you play rugby, every flanker is not going to try and hit you from the front, right? Because that's the hardest way to stop you. They're going to try and hit you from the side. And the lower they hit you, the easier it is to make your center of mass fall over. So what they're going to try and do, if their mission is to take you and hit you as effectively as possible, is to hit your knees that way. Hit your knees laterally, which is the way that your knees aren't built to tolerate force. So we're constantly in these kind of competitive surroundings where a lot of what we're doing makes no sense in terms of joint health. It's not necessarily what the joint is designed for. It doesn't mean it can't tolerate it. And it doesn't mean that it's a horrific idea. But if the goal is health, sport is not the key to it. Sport is healthier a lot of the time than sitting on a sofa doing absolutely nothing, which is why it can be really beneficial for a lot of people. And there's all sorts of other sporting endeavors and elements of doing it that are healthy, right? A lot of the time it gets you outdoors for a start. That could improve. It's not my area of expertise, but as far as I'm aware, being outdoors is maybe good for your guts, right? There's elements of sports where it allows us to disconnect and be sociable and do all these things that are beneficial for us from a mental health point of view. But for our joints, there's far more logical things we could do that would load them in a way that would be more conducive to them maybe having a bit more longevity to them. And the extent to which this is the case is going to vary a lot between different individuals, right? Some people are super tolerant and can play rugby until they're in their 50s and somehow be all right with it. And then some people don't even get out of high school doing it because they're just too fragile, delicate in terms of the stuff that keeps them together. So I think it really depends on how we're judging optimization. And just because someone can do something doesn't make it beneficial. Just because a gymnast can put his arms out there doesn't mean that it is a good idea. The process of him getting there is he might have progressively gotten stronger to the point where that's actually not so bad for him, right? The stuff within him that's meant to keep him strong in those positions and stop him exceeding those positions, that because he's progressed there, that might make it not such a bad idea, right? He may have progressed through those ranges, might have been doing it since they were a young age. The other big thing that I think is often missed with this stuff is, well, yes, the reason that person is a gymnast and is holding that position and trying to do so is because they have that joint range available. A lot of the time in understanding exercise, we miss the idiosyncrasies in individuals' architecture. The fact that the shapes and sizes and ranges available to us literally structurally, right? Before bone doesn't really bump into bone, there's lots of like stuff in between it, but before bone approximates to the point where there's no range left in a joint, that varies dramatically between different individuals. Joints are like acetabulums have different orientations in a pelvis relative to heads of femurs and necks of femurs and all this kind of stuff. And you can literally be designed to do the splits or have no hope in hell of doing the splits without tearing stuff. You are either born to do the splits or you're not. And whether you choose to explore that or not is another matter. And maybe through not even exploring it, even though you had the pieces there to do so, that might mean that over time you kind of lose that ability. But there is a structural ability to get into the splits or not in individuals. And so the people that aren't built for it don't often end up becoming professionals at doing it. They're not often the ones that are on television. It's usually the ones that are born with this gift. So that's kind of how I'd unpack all of this stuff, is just because they can do it doesn't, one, mean they should, doesn't, two, mean you can, whoever this person who is discussing this stuff with me. And just because it's something that they're on television doing looking cool doesn't mean it's actually making them healthy on a daily basis. And if this person has come to me and said, hi, could you improve me internally from a performance perspective, that's a very different task that I'm being presented with and a different thing I'm trying to optimize for.
Good answer.
It wasn't a short one.
I didn't ask a short question. Yeah, I like it. I agree with it. There's a lot of points that you made, especially when it comes to being someone sitting on a couch. That's not necessarily healthy either, but doesn't necessarily mean that not doing that is healthier, because it's all just a context thing, right? And it's all just how much are you doing of what thing, and what can you tolerate, and how are you going about something. I find it interesting because there's always that argument between this stuff and the other side of training, because people are just, the functional stuff and everything for years, and that still gets around a little bit, because there's people that, and you would see people that talk about, I'm trying to think of the terminology they use. It'll be things like, the basics. The basics is one people love to do. The basics, deadlift, squat, bench, overhead press, or so
there's complex multi-joint things that require someone to manage loads of joints at once while they do them, right?
Yeah.
Those basics.
Those basics, right?
Okay.
Yeah. Well, it's because it's the way I still see it the same way. But for instance, like if I get a client and I go, I might assess them and say, okay, squat, hinge, push, pull, like some basic stuff, right? But that does mean basic. It means that like they're on a chest press that like can't do anything but just push right out in front of them and they're seated. I'm not going to be like, oh, you've never been in a gym, let's bench press. Like
on a Bosu ball.
On a Bosu pole. Yeah. Well, even squatting, right? It's like the things that people would, it's just squat. And then sometimes people go, also show me how you squat. Oh, and no, literally like, I just want to see what you do on your own first, because like, I'm curious, like, do you squat in your life? Oh, not really. Okay. If you were to, can you show me what that would look like? And then sometimes people will do it and go, it's probably horrible. Actually, it's not bad. You know what I mean? But I just kind of wanted to see what you did normally. I'm not even going to try to add any weight or anything to this. I just kind of want to see that. And I find that to be the interesting side of what we were talking about, because as far as a chest fly goes, people will address that in the same way. But to me, it's the same thing. Oh, so you're saying dumbbell chest flies are bad? Well, no, it's just that if I had access to a cable fly, I might choose that over that because of this reason. And then, okay, what if I don't have access to a cable fly? Probably just use dumbbells then. Or like if you really insist on doing a fly, right? Like, and you're saying I want to be able to do a fly, and you don't have cables, well, then you can probably do a dumbbell fly. It's not. It's if they're just working out from home and they insist on that.
Yeah.
Well, then I don't have any other answer for you. You're kind of acting like I have this other answer when ultimately I don't, because like there's multiple versions of something and you don't have the version I would pick if I had that choice. And this is the internet in a nutshell, because people will go, what's good and what's bad? And then a lot of people will go, well, there's no good and no bad exercises. I've always found that to be a funny one. Maybe there's not good or bad.
There is inappropriate.
See, you've got to watch the wording though, right? Because if we were to go, if you went, oh, this is bad, and I put that out there on the internet, people are going to go, oh, is that what that Benny guy said? He says this is bad. And belt squats are a funny one, because I remember we talked about them. I've had probably 3 or 4 conversations with multiple people who all say they're shit, right? And it's funny because it's just like, I went through a period where I was powerlifting and I used a homemade one and it was great. I liked it. This podcast is sponsored by Achievement Apex. Achievement Apex creates some of the best barbells in the world, and they supply some of these barbells to some of the strongest powerlifters and athletes in the world. If you want an Achievement Apex barbell, you can go to achievementapex.com and use the code PORTAPOTTY for 10% off any order that you make. Maybe it wasn't optimal, but at the time I used it and I liked it. It was fine. But it's like, it's still a funny thing because people will attach that experience to a strong opinion. That's like me now coming at you and going, no, but I used it once and I had a good time, so you're wrong. When ultimately it's like, I'm basing everything I'm feeling off the emotion. Yeah. And my attachment to something and what it got, what it gave me, when ultimately, like you said, there's kind of like a smoke screen there. And I think when we try to unpack it, people just get frustrated as opposed to kind of actually want to listen to that. And that's why the fly is a good example, because I just think it's to an extent what you're almost saying is flies in general aren't maybe completely necessary for some people, really, because a cable fly, as you've said, is you're just putting something really far away from the joint still. And so it's kind of like probably would pick a press maybe 9 out of 10 times. But you're not saying a chest fly is a bad exercise. No, and I mean, if it was the proximity or distance from the joint that was a concern to me, maybe based on an individual's. But I like, for example, if I took the cable fly, right, and I was still holding it in my hand, like it's worth it to me to have that distance and that stress on the joint, because I'm actually achieving something novel in the process. I'm achieving something different from if I was just doing pressing, right? I'm getting a challenge in that short and more horizontally adducted position. So that kind of makes sense to me. But then I've also got mitigation options as well, right? I could attach a cuff to it and bring that force closer to the joint, and I'd have to increase the force, but I've then reduced some of the joint forces involved as well. Have it around the elbow. Or, yeah, exactly. Like that. Well, anything closer than the wrist is an improvement, right? Wherever kind of happens to be comfortable or suitable for the individual, and sometimes it could be the size of the cuff they have. There's all these factors in here, right? And it's like, it just depends how deep someone's willing to go in this investigative process, right? Like if the goal was just get something to give me some stimulus here, like I may well have a resistance band that would do that for me. If it's just that portion of the range that I'm missing out on from, my pressing not ending up in that shortened position, I could use it with a resistance band. I could equally just take a bar, like a column, and do isometrics as hard as I can in a few of those end ranges, and I would have achieved the same outcome that I'm trying to do, right? This reason why I'm holding these weights, the reason why I'm holding this cable is I'm trying to create more of a challenge to force output, to tension production through certain tissue in certain ranges of contractile lengths that it can produce. And I could just achieve that with multiple isometrics in those ranges that were kind of missing from me doing heavy pressing if all I had was dumbbells, because I've probably got a wall somewhere. Probably got a wall or a column that I could use somewhere. And if I didn't have that, I could probably find a way of lying on the floor and pushing into the floor at a certain angle that would do the same thing. As soon as we start to see stuff as just merely means of applying force to anatomy, force to structure, and different positions in which we can achieve that, and different degrees of support and different degrees of like guidance, like you were talking about when you were discussing maybe a chest press that someone didn't have the coordination or orchestration to just do a dumbbell or barbell bench press because things would be all over the place because they're a new client. As soon as we can identify
the tools that we have in a gym or the tools that we have in a bedroom as just being a means of challenging force production, tension production, stimulus being created, then it all becomes a lot clearer and we become more objective about it. We're able to separate ourselves from the emotion that we might have from the experience of doing it ourselves. And that no longer needs to be part of our identity, right? It can just be this, yeah, I actually really like those, but I can see the situations under which that might be more or less suitable for someone. I can see that, oh, I really appreciated them because they took away the spine stuff, but I still felt like I was squatting or deadlifting without a spine challenge. Whereas people that maybe aren't so concerned with being good at squatting or deadlifting don't have a positive association with being like, oh, this must be making my squat good. And they wouldn't give a shit about that. And they'll be just as happy on a leg press where they haven't got some belt going across their hips and feeling a bit uncomfortable. So there's just so many elements to what might make something more or less suitable for certain individuals. If someone's quite heavily overweight, that strap could dig into a lot of stuff and be really uncomfortable. Someone's really, really lean and they've got no padding there that could also cause the same thing, right? And there might be like a nice place in between for someone where they're not dick skin lean and they're not really overweight and they've not got this worst of either worlds, and it can be really comfortable as like there's enough room for it, but it's not slicing through anything. So there's just so many caveats to put in this stuff that I think it's really tricky to say. Like it's just childish, man, to say. And I can say that because I don't know the people that have said it, right? But I think it's fucking childish if you're genuinely saying that something sucks, because that means that you have got the inability to objectively think of the circumstances under which it might be beneficial.
Yeah, sorry. I mean, I'm stuck on the fact that you mentioned about being overweight and the belt squat being uncomfortable, and then laughing about the fact that ironically, like fat powerlifters are the ones that like use them the most and kind of created them. So I find that an interesting.
Well, maybe they've got enough padding that it doesn't hurt.
Or maybe they're just in the hurt locker and they just want to train, and who cares about pain? You know, people do lots of weird, uncomfortable exercises all the time. The Zercher squat is a great example. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not saying it doesn't achieve good things. It seems to be helpful for combat sports and things like that. And when you take some things in consideration, it's not generally the intention behind why someone's doing it makes sense, but it also just feels horrendous.
Yeah, it's comically uncomfortable for the outcome that it achieves.
Yeah, you were set. Yeah, and then you end up. Yeah, it's just it's like the old school version of being like, oh, I've got something here, and I've got this other really strong thing here. So I'm going to put this thing that's not as strong in the way of that strong thing on the way to try to make that thing stronger.
Yeah.
And I find that funny. And the chest fly one's an interesting one. I saw someone doing it with chains. I found that really interesting, like laying down, doing it with chains. Mm-hmm. And then that made a bit more sense, right?
I mean, it gets harder at the top, because more of the chains come off the floor, right? Which kind of makes sense in a way, because you get structurally strong up there, but you also get muscularly
weaker,
quite weak. And then you've got the management of the fact that chains don't really land on the floor in a perfect straight line. They kind of go like dunk, 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 dunk. So suddenly the force being placed on your arms is like as each link lands on the floor.
Yeah.
So that could be kind of off-putting in terms of your like being able to focus on executing the exercise. And I don't know, the positions that like people are wobbly enough when I watch them try and use dumbbells for that, let alone something that can kind of wave in the air on the way up and down. So
it always comes back to the same thing though. I saw a guy who can bench like 500 pounds doing it. So people would be like, oh, you know, it looks pretty cool. And it's just like, for him, it probably wasn't much of a challenge. You know what I mean? Like, or maybe towards the end was, but his stabilizers are like are incredible because of, being able to bench 500 pounds. So it's an interesting one. And like, that's why I saw them a lot on, I think Chris did it. Podcast Godfather, Chris Williamson.
Oh yeah.
And he had like Mike on, and I think, who was the other bodybuilder guy, the really old school, Stan Efferding.
Okay.
And they did the whole like, if you could only do 10 exercises. And I always find these funny, right? Because it's literally people just picking shit they like, right? Yeah. It's not like, oh, this is the best thing ever. And I always do it. But I was kind of curious as to yours from like that standpoint. So not what you want, but like, let's say you were in a position where you could pick 10 exercises, but they could be like, it could be a fucking $16,000 Atlantis cable machine or something like that. So you could pick specific exercises, but also let's pretend you've got $1 million and they can be performed exactly how you want them to be performed. That's I find interesting because then if someone picks like dumbbell flies or something in the 10, you're like, why would you?
Yeah,
You could have anything.
Insanity. Yeah, especially if they had pressing in there, right? And it's like, why would you do those when you could also get some tricep goodies out of a press? So I don't know. The thing I've probably thought about this a lot more in terms of like if I could have 10 machines, what would they be? Like if I was going to fit a gym out with 10 bits of kit, I wrote a post on this the other day. So that's probably why that's the way I think about it. Because the first thing for me would just be a functional trainer, man. That thing where the arms go all over the place and the cables can essentially be attached to you at every angle. Because
similar to what we have out there?
You've got one.
Yeah.
So you've got one here, and that thing's a dream, right? Because it's so much better than your standard cable stack setup. Because the beauty of cables is that resistance can come from a different direction from, say, dumbbells and barbells, right? You're essentially able to manipulate gravity and redirect it, which I think is so cool, but that's because I'm a real nerd. And if we think about the fact that we can have resistance coming from two different directions and we can manipulate the height or depth of that resistance coming at us, what we can also do is the width of it with those functional arms. So that's really cool, right? Because sometimes it might, say we were trying to do some kind of cable-y fly pressy thing, it might be too dramatically inwards when we're using a fixed stack. Whereas if we can also bring the arms in, we could have something coming from just slightly outwards from behind us. So the variability that allows us, I think, makes it a beauty. Like I would always put one of those in a gym first because there's nothing really that you can't challenge by using one. Particularly if we're talking about like single joint functions and multi-joint upper body functions, and then just anything that you're using would allow you to do some squatty leg, like multi-joint leg stuff, right? After that, I'd probably go Smith machine. I just think, again, super underrated, almost vilified by a large portion of the industry by just not having an understanding as to all that has been created there as a means of guidance. And so this client that comes to us and might not have the ability to move mass through space with a lot of stability and a lot of coordination doesn't need to worry about that on a Smith machine. They can push it and just worry about pushing it and hopefully locking it out at the top so that they don't drop it on their teeth. But the other beauty of it is I've got stoppers in there as well, right? I've got safeties in a Smith machine. So I don't have to worry about the safety of someone switching off for a second and exceeding their range or dropping the bar or anything like that, because I can make sure it can never harm them. And a barbell doesn't really give me that option to the same extent. I could have the stoppers out, but then they've got to be in between them in order for that to be okay. And things can tilt in either direction. And it's just the variability there. I don't trust clients. I don't trust people in the gym, really. They especially if they're new to this stuff, or if they're not new to this stuff, they're training so hard that they're so close to the end of their limit that they shouldn't be required to manage this stuff right at the end of their abilities, right? So I would probably use that, and it allows us great squatty type stuff as well. What's really nice about it is that it's like a hack squat without a back pad forcing your hips into positions that you might, and your knees and your ankles into positions you might not have available. It's like a hack squat with an element of liberty to it, which is kind of fun. And you can choose how far forward your knees go or don't. And you can maybe sit into some squat positions that you wouldn't be able to normally because you'd fall on your ass, because you don't have to manage this center of mass over base of support stuff. And then there's the fact that you can mess around with the profile, the resistance coming from the machine, because you can band a Smith machine, right? You can't band a barbell. As soon as you move slightly away, like one direction or the other, the bands are going to be trying to pull you back and potentially spring you back into position, which is a nightmare. As soon as you're fraction out, it's all going wrong. So I think if I had it my way, I'd go functional cable trainer thingy. Then I go Smith machine.
We need 10 though.
10?
Yeah.
I'll keep going.
You keep going, but just while we're at it, just because people are also nerds, do you have specific choices for those? Like, do you have, like a multifunction cable machine, like a brand that you enjoy, or same with the Smith machine?
I'd say with the arm ones, previously, So Free Motion are the ones that have made those since the start. I think they're the ones that first brought out this Freedom trainer. They did it, and then at the time, Nautilus or Cybex might have done it first, but there was like back in the day when machines first came out, and again, Nautilus were the first bits of kit in gyms, right? The first like proper machines with cams on them. So they might have been the ones that did them first, but I'm pretty sure it was Free Motion. I think that was kind of the logic behind the name, right? Is that you've got this freedom of planes that you can explore, exercise through. So I think they did it, and they do it really well because they've been building these things and building them quite like expensively, high quality things. They're not trying to just make knockoffs to put in any facility. Free Motion have done them well for a long time, and especially if you're getting an old piece of kit from them, they do those well. One thing I've seen recently, which piqued my interest, is they're up until Cybex got cancelled, right? Well, not cancelled, sorry, closed down because Life Fitness bought them and then just sunsetted the company, which is criminal, to be honest, considering quite what that brand is to the industry and some of the stuff that they've made over the years. And Cybex had something called the Cybex Bravo, which is so your two standard columns, right, as opposed to these wavy arms. You've got two standard dual cable stack pulleys that go up and down, and they have all sorts of different directions in which you can move them, which is kind of fun. And then there was also this arm came out of the middle of it that had a pad on the end. So what it meant is that without needing to wheel a bench over, you were able to do chest supported stuff. You had something to like solidify your start. You had support. You could anchor your arm to something or your chest to something or your back to something, which was really good in terms of, well, increasing force output or maybe just creating a variation for someone. And Watson recently came out with a functional trainer that also has the arm in the middle, which I think is kind of like the best of both worlds. It looks like a proper bit of kit. I doubt it's cheap, but they do stuff with like really nice bearings in them, and they make very smooth kit. And I haven't tried that thing yet, but I saw it in a post recently, and I was like, that looks like it could be the one, man, because it's got the variation that we can move the arms around, but then it's also got a piece of support built into it that we can choose to use if we decide to. Which a lot of the time, right, if you're trying to do kickbacks, if you're trying to do anything, half the problem with doing them well is the fact that you're wobbling all over the place trying to stand on one leg or trying not to let the weight drag you backwards when you're doing a chest press. That's why you put a pad or a bench behind you. So the fact that that's inbuilt and you can just kind of like lower it down or and extend it as far as you need it, or then tuck it back in and put it away when you don't want it anymore, pretty handy bit of kit. So that's probably the one that I'd go for on the Freedom Trainer. When it comes to Smith machines, man, I don't have a brand in mind on that front. I think the key thing, if we're looking at using it with clients, like a lot of clients are light women, and when they first join the gym or come for sessions, they're not particularly strong yet, unless they're mums, in which case they've got this strange like mum strength, right, that appears to just get injected into someone when they give birth. They're suddenly incredibly strong out of nowhere, and they might struggle with using Smith machines that aren't counterbalanced. So within them, they haven't got anything that offloads the weight of the bar itself and all the bearings.
Have you seen ours out here?
Yeah. Well, you got two, right? You got one that's counterbalanced and one that isn't.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's nothing wrong necessarily with the one that isn't, but it reduces the options of the number of people you can use that with like your minimum load. Right. The reason why it might be nice to do Smith machine presses as opposed to like a push-up, aside from the fact that you don't have to control like your body, is that you also don't have to lift your whole body. You could just lift however much you want to put on the bar. You could also lift way more than your body, right? So you've got that option to scale load up and down. And if it's not counterbalanced, you might have like a minimum of, say, 20 kilos on the bar, which could be a lot for someone. So I think look for that, and then look for one that has maybe a relatively conducive means of offloading or counterbalancing it, excuse me. But that's quite common. Like any bar above the bar itself is going to give you an opportunity to wrap some bands around it and make it get lighter on the way down, which might be nice in certain pressing scenarios and maybe doing a squat, for example, with a client where it's most difficult at the bottom. And as a result, you could maybe do with the weight getting lighter at the bottom so we could better match the resistance to their strength and give them a more consistent amount of challenge throughout it.
Mm-hmm. Okay. 2 so far?
2 so far. Third, I mean, I know you gave me $1 million, but I refuse to get away from the logic of having a 45 degree.
I was waiting for that. Yeah.
Yeah. But that's because you've seen how much I love the things and how much we use them on a course as well, right?
Yeah, I also just like them myself. And the only thing that frustrates me is there's companies that are maybe a little bit older and they don't make them very adjustable.
Yeah.
I've always found that frustrating. Like I saw a really cheap one once and I was like, oh, $100. And then I looked at it and it was like, you can't adjust it. That's like 30% of the population that can't use that now because they're either too tall or too short.
Yeah.
But yeah, 45 degree, I can't disagree with you. There wouldn't be anyone special. I mean, the one we have out there is probably everything you need, right? It's adjustable.
But it's not adjustable in both the directions that I'd like. You can't adjust the angle.
Yeah, okay.
So I know Atlantis, they make a nice adjustable one. I think it's also got an adjustable calf pad as well in terms of how far or close you want it to be. So like if someone's got massive quads and calves, you might need that pad to be a bit further away. And if someone's slimmer, if it's too far away, they're almost at an angle to begin with and they're not flush to the padding on their thighs. So that can be quite nice as well. And then they've also got, you can change the degree of it, which is going to allow us to, one, manipulate the resistance profile, but then at the same time, potentially account for different ranges of mobility within a person.
This podcast is sponsored by Power Pit Rockingham. And Power Pit Rockingham is probably the best gym for you to train in if you are in Rockingham and want access to quality powerlifting equipment and a good environment to train in when it comes to powerlifting training or bodybuilding training. If you are in the area and want to do so, pop on down to Power Pit Rockingham, jump in for a casual session and tell them that the Porta Potty sent you.
Like if someone can get really extended, you might not want them starting too vertical in the first place because they'll go past the axis at the top into not even having any challenge. So being able to adjust that for the individual as well is quite nice. But I mean, they're just such great bits of kit because they're not $100 if you're getting a good one, but for how much you're paying, the fact that you can do hip extension, spinal extension, and challenge lateral flexion on it are all pretty solid reasons to use one. You could even, if you were trying really hard, you can even do like sort of spider curl, preacher curl type things on them pretty well, considering you've got a pad that is at that angle at one side and quite vertical on the other. So I just think that there's something that also they don't really move other than the adjustability of them. They survive pretty well in gyms unless people are being idiots with them and people are trying to force it when they haven't, realized that you're meant to pull the pin out or something. But yeah, I think Atlantis make one really good. Watson have one where the angle is adjustable as well. And then there's like some random Chinese company called Impulse that does that too. And I think that to me is the real game changer. Because otherwise, if I'm trying to achieve that, I've often taken one and then put some stuff under the feet to change its angle for what I'm looking for. And that's just, it also feels a little bit dangerous not having something quite so securely on the floor. So yeah, adjustability of the angle on a 45 degree would be really nice to have, but they're just so versatile considering how simple they are.
And they don't take up a lot of space as well.
Yeah.
That's another positive.
Yeah, some of them do a little bit. The more adjustable ones end up with like a slightly bigger footprint to them. But yeah, so there's a bit of a trade-off there, I guess.
I think in my head it's only because I'm comparing them to the ever so inconvenient reverse hyper.
Yeah.
And they're like huge.
Yeah.
We came across a hilarious one a little while ago that we wanted. Oh no, sorry. This will be an interesting topic before we continue. I came across a seal row. I'll see if I can still find.
Is that where you lie on your stomach and you pull the bar? Okay.
And I like them.
Yeah.
I think I don't know how you feel about them overall. I think they're just kind of like, to me, they're like a T-bar row with more of an angle, less of an angle, if you want to put it that way. But they've got a consistent magnitude to them as well, right? So the profile weight's not out in front of you.
It doesn't arc.
It doesn't arc at all. Yeah, okay, yeah. So I mean, there is that element of it, but I guess for me, I just always enjoyed what it felt like, and also they're another simple one because it's really just like a bar and a bench.
Yeah.
But we came across one that was too short, so the pad would have been. Literally, I can show you, it would have been about that big.
So what, your legs are hanging off the end of it or something?
Legs are hanging off the end of it, right? So you're like, you had to like tense your quads to like feel like, I don't know, it's not like your leg was going to bend the other way, but it almost felt like it.
Yeah.
And then the bench itself was like this. So it was
felt like you're sliding off.
You felt like you were sliding off the whole time. And it was made by, there's like a company, like a CrossFit company. You've heard of like the Wildlife?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was like through them, I think, kind of. And it was just like really or like Chasing Better or something like that, I think it was. And it was like really like weird. It was just like, I wanted one so bad, and it was like, it was really cheap. And I was like, yes. And as soon as I laid on it, I was like, how have you, all you have to do is just make it a flat bench and long enough for people to lay on.
Yeah.
And it's like, I don't know how you fuck up the two kind of most important parts of it. I can understand the difference now that you mentioned that as well about the T-bar row, because we've talked about this before, and even the one we have out there's good, but there is even nicer ones too. Once again, they can get really expensive as well. The multi handle ones and stuff. I've never even used one of them, but I want to try one.
Yeah, their only small downside, if I was going to caveat those things, is just that they end up being quite heavy.
Yeah.
So that because of all the different pieces of metal that are on this thing, it can again this is not the bodybuilder perspective, right? And a lot of time bodybuilders have been involved in the design of these things, so they're going, yeah, that's great, man, and they love the fact that it's heavy because they don't have to put so many plates on the thing. But I look at this as a person who frequently trains women that are under 50 kilos and trying to get strong, and they can't use it. And so when I'm designing my dream gym, I really struggle to look at it from my own perspective. I'm always going to look at it as to like, where would I love to own and be able to train clients in? Because that's just as much a part of my world as my own training. I probably enjoy training other people and getting results out of that almost potentially more than doing so myself, because it's way more rewarding, right? Like they get so much more out of it than I do at this stage. Like I move pretty well. Like I've made enough gains to not be like, oh, I really need to get to the gym. Like, you know what I mean? There's just an element of it where I'm like, yeah, I'm pretty happy with things. It doesn't change my life each time I go to the gym. It just helps my day feel like it's complete. Whereas for these people, it's genuinely life-changing. And so that's why I'm like, give me the tools to change someone's life. Give me the tools that will allow me to take this person that can't usually exercise and do an awesome set.
Yeah, and also, I mean, in the process, still give you what you want. You're still getting what you want as well, right? It's not like it's not. But we tend to think selfishly. People are like, I want this amazing machine, and then, like you said, there are limitations as well, and that's where. And until you've worked with people that can't bench press a Smith machine with no weight on it, and things like that, you don't realize it's actually quite wild, and it is a lot better. I have to say that when I'm working with people who are just able, I think that's where I get the falling asleep, standing up, bending situation happening. I find, and I think that what you were saying as well about taking that into consideration is a big part of why you've got that whole steel row comes from the fact that I started powerlifting. Yeah. Like that's how I started exercising, or like mainly work. So to me, I'm like, but it worked. It's like the opposite of bench pressing, so it worked, and it's not. But it feels like it in your head because of the direction. But I think for me, it was always like, but I did it, and I got stronger at it, and I got bigger, and it wasn't. It's not the best from that point of view. But it's what we talked about before. It's like someone will still get a result from something, and then they're like, oh, but you're just hating on it. It's fine. It's like, well, it's actually just putting something in perspective, right? It'd be like if someone turned around to you and said something about like a car, right? That for whatever reason maybe wasn't the most efficient on fuel, or it wasn't the most economic, whatever. And then they were like, well, it's fine. The world isn't ending from the gas, or the car's getting me around. It's like no one's disputing that. Yeah. But a Prius might be better than a Hummer, and that's okay to have that outlook on it. Yeah. If you still want to drive a Hummer, it's fine.
Yeah, I'm not going to take it away from you and force you to drive a Prius. Like
I'm happy paying less for my fuel and getting around in my Prius. I'm happy with that. And I drive a Hyundai, so I'm like that guy. You know what I mean? They're like the most. If anything, you're the one with a big car, actually. Yeah. So it's an interesting thing to compare those things, and that's why I like these lists. And so we've got the cable machine, Smith machine 45. Yeah. What's next?
I think it would probably have to be. Oh, I'm so torn between a leg extension and a curl.
You've got so many left,
10.
though.
Yeah, true. I've got 10. I get a leg extension and a leg curl in there.
Both of them?
Yeah. Just because, like, again, setting them up on cables is such a pain. It's doable. You can come up with cable
It's not
variations.
the same though, is it?
Sometimes it's better.
No, but not from that point of view, because then you're held back by certain things, or I would think anyway, right? Like, yeah, okay, you might you might improve the resistance profile of the leg press, but how practical is it attaching something to your leg, or
To your shin, right?
how comfortable can that be, right? That's where it becomes one of those. This is why when you have someone who you've been in this, right? A client hits you up, oh yeah, I just trained from home, and you're like,
Oh wow.
what do you have?
Yeah.
And then they tell you, and you're like, yeah, we can make something happen with that. And the thing is, it's not that you can't, and you understand this, obviously being a fan of machines, I think anyway, it sucks. When someone says that, I'm like, look, I'm happy to train you, happy to help, but I'm bored because there's only so much we can do if you're in a room and you've spent $500 on stuff at Kmart. We are so limited.
Yeah.
And if you don't have access to one machine, it might be fun to program for 3 months.
And it's not that they need anything more than that in order to make gains, right? And to make progress. It's not that it's necessary. Like $500 from Kmart, equipment at home. The problem is that they don't really need us to the same degree, especially if there's someone who doesn't have a lot of things wrong with them and is relatively coordinated and good at remembering the stuff that they need to do, right? Like it's not just the fact that they haven't got kit, because if they haven't got kit but they've got lots of problems and they're presenting us with a problem solving opportunity where it's, hey, I haven't got access to these things, but I need to be able to do this way in order to be able to do it, then I don't know about you, but I still find that fun, because I'm still sat there on the other end of, I don't know, on the other end of a video camera or something going, there's got to be a way. There's got to be a way. What am I missing? There's got to be a way. And then like thinking about how I can hack it, and then going on the internet and finding something they could buy for $20 that would allow us to achieve that. And then like...
But we're opening it up then, right? Because then what you're saying is what they have isn't enough, because I need you to go buy this thing for $20, because I'm with you on that, because we're just lucky now that we live now. Because 30 years ago or 40 years ago, there was no Amazon that they could go on. And
30 years ago, we were more capable and weren't a bunch of like daisies that couldn't build anything ourselves. So we'd have probably gone in the garden. If we knew what we were actually trying to build, we'd have probably gone out the shed and actually knocked one together and gone, there we go. You know, I got my client the other day who trains from home on his balcony. I got him to order a step, like a little adjustable, like Reebok step up type thing, because it was going to allow, he's a tall bugger. And his range was so limited in doing split squat type stuff because his knee just hit the floor so early, and I didn't want him trying to stand on a bench or something insane. So that was giving us some options there, and it was giving us some calf raise options, and merely just being able to have his foot between half a foot and a foot off the ground was opening up a bunch of other variations of the stuff we were doing that was going to improve it, right? Like he could still do a calf raise before, he just wasn't able to get his heels below the floor, or he was doing it on this like sharp edge that wasn't very nice for the arch of his feet. So but it was so simple, right? It didn't have to be a step from Amazon. It could have been a block of wood. Unfortunately,
brick.
Yeah, unfortunately, most clients that can afford personal training aren't living lives where they're like, yeah, don't worry, mate. I knock things together on a daily basis, and I'm going to go and knock something together for the weekend, right? Runs a marketing agency. He's a very clever gentleman who sits at a desk all day and isn't in a position to fabricate his own workout equipment at home. So I got him to order a step, but it didn't have to be anything complicated. It was just something that he didn't realize when he was ordering equipment that would have made sense for like $20. So
I did the same thing recently with a client for the TRX.
Yeah.
And that was $50. And, you know, we'd spoken about it, and she was like, oh, kind of. And I said, look, like the biggest thing is you're hitting me and saying I need to do a workout. I'm standing on concrete.
Yeah.
Right. And I have nothing. Right. And she's like, does FIFO or something. And I'm like, if you get a TRX, you can fold it up, put it in your bag, and then you will have a lot of resistance. Well, you already have it.
From different directions.
It's just that, you know, you are the resistance.
Yeah.
It's just that we have no way of leveraging that. So as soon as we have a TRX, for a start, if someone's standing on concrete, how do they do anything that's pulling related? There is no pulling exercises. You can't do them. So it's the kind of thing where as soon as we have a TRX, it's like, well, that's one thing that's come to the equation. But also there is lots of different things that you can do. So it's like, okay, awesome. And we have a lot more stability and all these kinds of things. This podcast is sponsored by Ped Test Australia. If you plan on using or are currently using performance enhancing drugs, it is very important that you make sure you are doing so, having them been tested before you use them or while you are using them, to make sure that you take care of your health. And you can also recommend that the people around you do so as well. Go to PedTest Australia on Instagram to find out more about the details on how you can test your current performance enhancing drugs that you are using, or you can find out more about testing other compounds or things that you are putting in your body if you would like to make sure that you take care of your health. So I know what you're saying in terms of that those things can really help. And for some people, it's like, what else was she going to do? She's not going to build a TRX anyway, even if she could. Why would just? It's $50. Like, don't put yourself through that. And then we have to trust that you built it with integrity. It's not going to snap when you're halfway through something. Just buy one. They're weight rated.
Have you read the story about how they came about? Like
No.
the founder of TRX?
No. I just assumed it was like an extension of like you got a door, you got a gym. You know, there's like advertisements and the dudes.
I mean, I'm trying to recall it well, and I'm very bad at recalling such things, so probably shouldn't have brought this up. But it was something along the lines of this guy was like a Navy SEAL or something like that. He was in the army, going in and out, flying in and out of different places, and he wanted to be able to train when he didn't have gym equipment. And I think what he did is tied 2 judo belts together and then closed them through the top of a door so that they came out the other end, and then was sort of using those, right, like wrapping his hands around the ends of those and using them to pull, and then went, oh, I could actually make a product out of this. And I think the founder of the TRX is like ex-military, and I'm pretty sure I heard like a really cool podcast about him talking about the product itself and how he'd come up with it, because it's, I don't know, I think considering it's something that is everywhere in the industry, it's kind of cool that it was 2 judo belts tied together, slammed through the top of a door while some bloke was in camp.
It is, yeah. I find it funny as well that they're popular in gyms, right?
Yeah, of all places to have one.
Yeah, the only place we don't need one. Yeah. I love it. I used to work at a gym, and he did something really funny where we didn't have squat racks at like the top area, so he bolted kind of these things to the wall that had like a ring off them, and then attached them to that. And we sort of needed them upstairs. And you could do that, but at the same time, it was also one of those things that, as you know yourself, right, with a TRX, it's pretty hard. It depends on how I put this. It's not that it's hard to train your lats, but sort of to an extent, because obviously I can do lots of rowing motions, but it's not like I can do much of a. It can be hard to do like an overhead vertical pull with a TRX efficiently, because of generally they're like hanging off a wall and they're almost touching the ground. So you have to you could, but it's obviously the most common thing people do with them is a row, right?
Yeah, and you need to almost elevate your feet in order to be able to do some vertical pulling stuff. It's a bit of a pain in the ass.
Yeah, like it's possible, but as we mentioned before, generally the clients that are using a TRX row don't want their fucking feet off the floor.
Yeah.
So it was funny that he did it, but it was also this sort of thing where it was like, in the end, he bought 6 of them and attached them all to the wall, and I couldn't help but think, for an extra $500, we not just got like a cable machine. I just always found it funny, but we're never going to get through it if we don't do the exercises. So you were on a leg curl and a hamstring curl. I have 2 questions. I want to know if there's brands of each that you would like, and then secondly, the hamstring curl. You said it like you were implying lying, but I'm curious as to, would you prefer seated or single leg?
I don't know, man. I think if I've only got 10, I would probably try to find a dual piece of kit. Like,
no, that's cheating.
No, is that cheating?
No, the answer is, but also, do they have something that does lying and standing hamstring curls and stuff?
Lying and seated, prone and seated hamstring curls.
Oh, do they?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So
what's more common is prone hamstring curl with a leg extension.
Yeah, well, I've Kinta have one, and we used it recently. Which for me personally, any machine that does that, and this is probably where you'll disagree, but I always find that a machine that essentially has the ability to do both things generally doesn't achieve either of them, or achieves one of them, but then the other one's not great.
Yeah.
It's common anyway. I think I've never used a machine to this day that achieves 2 things at once amazingly.
So the thing is that usually it's very difficult to design a cam to do both things well, right? You need slightly different resistance profiles for one thing or the other. So that's part of the issue. Second of all, most people don't design cams to do either one well, so in the first place. So that's tricky. I have to say, the Kaiser leg extension and leg curl, you know them, the the air compression brand, where the resistance is not plates moving through space, it's air compressors, like pistons compressing.
Oh, you talked about this in the course. Yeah, I've never seen one.
So there's no inertial effects. So you can kick the thing as hard as you want or pull it as hard as you want, and it doesn't really affect anything. I mean, there's a little bit of inertia from the metal of the thing itself moving, but you don't have weight stacks moving through air. And
so the resistance is the same?
Yeah, the resistance is the same no matter how hard or fast you move the thing. They're really cool. They're used a lot in athletic circumstances, because what it means is that you get to be explosive and you can throw the thing without having to worry about catching it when that momentum runs out, right? When you throw it and then having to catch it when it lands.
So what happens at the end of the...
If you push it fast, it still produces just as much force the whole time as if you pushed it slow.
But then what happens at the end of the range? Does it just
stops? Yeah, just stops. It doesn't try and keep going.
Then you have to bring it back, or will it...
No, it keeps coming back with the same amount of force as you pushed it there with.
Oh, okay. So it doesn't produce any extra force.
No.
Okay, I get what you're saying. Yeah. Wow. Yeah. That's just... I'm trying to picture how that would feel.
Glorious.
Really?
Yeah, truly.
Why isn't everything made out of that, Benny?
Well, it's tough. For a start, certainly in the old days, what most people did if they had Kaiser equipment is they have like a full circuit of it. Similar to the old days of Nautilus when you had circuits of equipment in a gym, right? Because what you would do is these things require air pressure in order to be powered, in order to have weight to them, right? And so you would have a compressor unit in a room out the back, and then pipes going from that to each of the machines. And that's, like as soon as someone tries to use a machine and they increase the force, the resistance by pressing on like the plus button, and it goes and it pumps more air into the cylinder so that there's more resistance to it being compressed. And you'll hear the compressor in the back go brum, as someone's using more air. And then what you used to have to do as well is when you were done, you used to have to pop them open. Otherwise, the air would just keep building up, and the thing would bloody explode. So, there were practicality. Eventually, they figured out how to make sure that it would bleed enough to not be an issue if you just left it. But yeah, you used to need a compressor. And it meant that if you couldn't afford a whole system, it didn't make much sense getting a compressor because there was a cost, right? And if you were getting a compressor for one piece of equipment, that didn't make much sense. These days, they've got built-in compressors in the equipment, in each piece of Kaiser equipment. They're really nice. One of the attendees at the course, Elle, she said that she had a Kaiser cable cross, so the Kaiser functional cable, which is pretty cool because that's gas-powered as well. So you end up with inertia-free cable, so you can do all sorts of crazy stuff with them, and they're not going to sling weight around.
Because she's a Genesis, she said. I think
is that what she is?
They have a lot of I've heard
some funky stuff.
I've heard they have nice stuff. Yeah.
So yeah. So the Kaiser stuff's nice, and it's purely because you've got that lack of inertial effects, and you can kind of you can almost be explosive with leg extensions if you chose to, but at the same time, the resistance profiles that they've built on their single joint equipment is really quite nice. I don't know why, because on some of their other stuff, it really doesn't make much sense. But on their knee curl and extension, and on their elbow curl and extension, their profiles are pretty nice. So that's why it would probably get my pick.
The leg extension?
Yeah, and the curl.
Oh, and
their seated curl. Yeah, both pretty bloody nice. The one thing I would say is that the prime leg extension and prone curl, where you've got the three positions that you can put plates on this moving plate-loaded machine. The thing is, right, like a lot of the prime kit doesn't make tons of sense. I'm like, why do you want all the poor profiles when there's one decent one on here? Like, what's the point of the rest of them? If the goal was to just challenge the middle range, I know, I'll put it on the logical profile and then just make the weight appropriate for my middle range and stay there. Like, why would I set the resistance to be greatest in the middle range and then piss around with the bottom and the top, which are sub-maximally challenging me, and then have it go oomph and then be easy and then oomph in the middle on the way back down?
Yeah.
Why wouldn't I just choose whatever profile fit the whole thing and then just make it appropriate for that middle space? So, and again, I say these things don't make sense to me. I say a lot of the shit that I say, right? I'm just like, oh, this doesn't make sense. Like, I've got some genius perspectives on this stuff. I really should be honest and be like, I am essentially regurgitating a lot of the perspectives that I've received from Tom Purvis, who's, I don't know many people in the world that know as much about equipment and how it could and should be designed from a profile, from a interfacing, from an adjustability standpoint as he does. I mean, he was a consultant for Nautilus and Cybex back in their heyday. He helped design the Bowflex that sold $1 billion in the US.
Was it Arthur Jones?
Arthur Jones,
Did Nautilus?
he created Nautilus.
Created
he was the founder.
Nautilus, yeah.
Oh my God. Reading about him is incredible, fascinating. Like the amount of money Nautilus used to make because they were the first movers in the space on selling equipment. And the stuff he did to really figure out how to make equipment well was remarkable. Incidentally, he and Tom Purvis, both from Oklahoma, bizarre coincidence of all the cities in all the countries around the world.
Think of what we could have got if they'd grown up together.
I mean, yeah, I don't know how well they'd have gotten along. They're both very, I mean, I think with a lot of knowledge, with a lot of thoughts, there comes, you know, a lot of personality behind that. But it's been, I think it's quite cool that sort of Arthur Jones has created this perspective on what machines could and should be, and then he's kind of passed away, and Tom's continued exploring that stuff because Tom built some of the kit that went in the Oklahoma Gold's Gym back in the 80s, right, when he was just knocking stuff together in his dad's garage. So there's kind of been this cool continuation of legacy and stuff like that with these two guys exploring it. But my perspectives on matching resistance to strength and designing machines well really stems from all the knowledge that I've gained from Tom, and then just mucking around with using stuff. But that prime one where you can put the plates where you want them so that they drop off appropriately, the thing that I like about that from a leg extension and hamstring curl perspective, where you've created this dual functionality piece of equipment, is you get to like build your own cam, right? By putting the weights where you want them to be so it gets heavy in the places that you want it to be. And as a result, for each different exercise, you can put the plates in a different place if you wanted to, and design the perfect profile for each of those two different exercises while having one piece of equipment to do so. The only problem I've got is that it takes 18 months for them to deliver a piece of equipment to you. And if I've got $1 million, I'm not waiting 18 months. I'm going to have to go and essentially offer someone who has one more than they paid for it in order to get hold of one, if it's going to go in this gym that I've only got space for 10 pieces of.
Yeah, Jesus, that's a long time.
Crazy, right?
I'm very impatient. Well, okay. Well, it's been an hour and we've made it through half the exercises, so we need 5 more.
Okay, 5 more. I'll rattle them off.
No, I still give good answers because otherwise it will be disappointing. I'm sure you'll miss something if you do that. Sure. But it's okay. We've got the cable machine, the Smith machine, the 45-degree leg curl, hamstring curl.
Yeah, leg extension, hamstring curl.
Sorry.
Yeah. It's so difficult though as well to decide between a prone hamstring curl and a seated one, because the seated one, like I get that solid, much more secure, better supported, better force output position. Mm-hmm. But then on the prone one, I get to explore a more shortened range of my hamstrings in knee flexion, which like I get the length and stuff when I do all my deadlifty kinds of things, right? So then I'm like, and prone hamstring curls are just miserable. Your face is like this against a chair. Your ass is in the air. It's just, yeah.
Go seated.
I think I'll go seated just because it makes me hate life a little bit less. And I like, yeah, from an enjoyment perspective. And then I think just, I feel like clients feel a bit more comfortable doing that and not having their ass in the air.
No one likes, from the people that I train anyway, lying's never anyone's favorite. They always complain about them. I've never had anyone complain about a seated one.
Yeah. So all right. So we'll stick with that.
Yeah.
Then I'd probably go, and again, there's not one on the market that I'd pick, but in Fantasyland, I'd have a really good chest-supported row. Tough to set up otherwise.
Plate loaded?
Nah, pin.
Pin loaded, yeah.
Yeah, or actually, if I was going with something on the market, it might have to be plate loaded, because that way, probably like one of those hammer strength things or something, like they don't fit my requirements or the way that I would design exercise very well, the way you're kind of encouraged to sit on them, and if you were trying to follow the little sticker on the side of it. But if you can better align yourself with the plane that the thing's moving in so that it's not diverging as you're trying to kind of pull through it, and if you can, I think you could set it up so that...
This podcast is sponsored by Bulk Gym Chalk. Do you struggle to hold onto your deadlifts? If so, it can be very important to make sure that you have good quality chalk and access to that chalk. So go to Bulk Gym Chalk. You can find them on Instagram and get yourself some good quality chalk so that you can make sure that you can train in the gym and get the best out of your training while doing so.
You don't have the divergence. You've got a better profile. But with pulling exercises, because there's a plate arcing through space, you can make it go from heavy to light. And a lot of the time, pin loaded stuff, because it's relying on the cam and relying on someone to have designed this thing properly. It comes back to the leg extension curl thing, right? I'm like, at least with plate loaded, I can hack the thing to make it get heavy and light where I want it to. Whereas with pin loaded stuff, I've got to rely on someone having built a cam properly. And that's pretty rare. So that's probably why I'd choose plate loaded now that you say it. But if someone actually knew what they were doing and built a decent pin loaded one, I'd be all over it.
Okay. Just supported, right? I like it. So far, the list is hard to dispute. I would probably go with everything you've chosen, yeah.
Okay, next up, and I don't know, I can't think of a modern one that does it, but I'd probably go with a hip abduction. Oh. And one where the back goes down as well, just to give me some actual hip abduction and not horizontal abduction of the hip. So one where someone can have an extended hip and be lying flat as opposed to just being upright.
Never tried that. I would have no idea. That would feel great. Does it?
Well, you actually train your abductors, right? Because when you're doing the seated one, you're training your horizontal abductors, which is like your glute max and your piriformis and stuff. Whereas when you're lying flat, it's like when you do a standing like abduction with a cable, right? Where you're actually training your glute medius, glute minimus, that stuff, that TFL, that stuff down the side.
Are your feet, sorry, are your knees still bent? Your knees are
your knees are kind of bent like this, and it's just like this, but I'm lying flat, so my hips are extended.
But then, are you not limited in range?
Yeah, you end up more limited in range because you've got less abduction like degrees.
That's what I was saying.
For most people than they have when they're sat up, right? But you're also better able to target that stuff on the side of your hips, and that stuff on the side of the hips for a lot of people is a problem because it's engaged every single time you take a step. Every time you pick one foot off the ground, the other hip is having to stabilize you. And if it's not doing its job very well, then it's relying on a bunch of stuff in your trunk, your lateral flexors, to stable. And then if this hip's not doing stuff well, they get torched.
And also the seat's adjustable, so you can just sit up if you like.
Yeah,
I've never seen one.
And they've often got bang, 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 bang. So I've got one in the gym that I work out of in Malaysia, and it took me over 2 years of trawling Facebook Marketplace to get hold of one.
You found one on Marketplace?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, found one on Marketplace. Had to get it. It was an old Nautilus Nitro. It was like destroyed. Didn't have a belt on it, any of that kind of stuff. And I had to take it to a car workshop and get it stripped and resprayed and ordered a belt online and got that attached. And next thing you know, we've got the beauty of a machine that I use a ton with clients because it's not something that's super easy to get access to. But I've got so many clients with dodgy in various ways hips, and being able to choose different angles that might create slightly different stimulus is pretty nice.
So how do you feel when people lean forward?
Sure. I mean, if it suits their goal, right? If their goal is to get more of that glutey type stuff, and they're trying to, because they're effectively, the more you lean forward.
What about adduction?
Adduction, yeah, just probably puts a little bit more length in your adductors by doing that, but it doesn't change things as dramatically, right? When the more you go back, the more you run away from your abductors, like your side glutes, and the more you go towards your back glutes. Whereas you don't see as dramatic a change in like fan-shaped muscles fibers that are being explored with adduction when you change your degrees. Just primarily is going to maybe affect the relationship of the pelvis to those adductors.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So far you've listed, I wouldn't change a single thing. I think I'd have the same list, because one thing I always point out to a lot of people as well is that at any point, all you have to do is say, well, you don't even have to say it because we've got cables. But for example, all you have to do now is go dumbbells.
Yeah.
And then you have everything you could possibly need, because all the machines that you've listed are all things that you, for the most part, can't do without the machines, which is kind of how we're trying to design it here.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And I mean, that's my thought process here. Is like, even with the abduction thing, I could set someone up with a cable on a bench and all this kind of stuff. But also, like, and honestly, we're getting to the point with this list where if I was designing a gym that wasn't just for me to be on my own in all the time, I'd go back to, I'd just get another set of cables. Because otherwise the cables are in use all the time. Like, and because I've got people using cables to do all sorts, every single delt direction in all kind of ways. Right? I've got them using them for arm stuff. I've got them using them for hip stuff potentially as well, like kickbacky type things. I've got them using them for pressing stuff. And it's just like, at some stage I might just get another set of cables. So I don't know how that factors into this whole design process.
No. This is completely hypothetical.
Yeah.
Dragon Ball Z land.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. So is that 7? Yes, that's 7. You've got 3 more.
Yeah. I mean, actually, if we go back to the seated row, I'd probably pick the prime one, the prime plate loaded seated row.
Okay.
is probably where I'd go with that. That thing is just, again, there's so much you can change about your relationship to the resistance and the magnitude of the resistance.
I can look into all these machines now.
Yeah. The prime pull down is probably going to be pretty close on there for me as well. Again, the reason why it's them with these machines is with the row and the pull down is it's just one of those where I need a pretty dramatic change in resistance throughout the course of a rep, and no one does it well. I've not seen it designed that well without me having to like mess around and sit completely off center and way back from the machine and stuff like that. They're one of the few, because I can just choose where I put the resistance on it. I can sit where you're meant to sit and have all the support that you're meant to have and have the relationship to the arcs of the machine that you're meant to have, while at the same time being able to manipulate the resistance. Like usually I have to manipulate the person in order to manipulate the resistance. Whereas on these bits of kit, because they give you that option, again, I don't know why they don't just give you the logical option, right? And they force you to go. But hey, that's fine. That
it's still an option.
It's an option, and it's an option I'm grateful for. So yeah, again, I would. It would be nice if they arrived a bit quicker. But but as a result, yeah, they're probably two bits of kit that I would say are pretty sick in terms of just and they're the ones where it's just a whole new world, man. Like pulling exercises where it's actually heavy where you need it to be and not light is just crazy. You almost have to like recompute the way that Tom talks about it, is having to like rewrite the file in your head, because you've got to suddenly produce way more force in places that you never had to when you did any other form of pulling exercise. So I'd probably put the pull down in there, because when we come back to this, like, you could just use dumbbells or you could just use cables. And the reason for me for choosing the abduction thing is it's like, I could use cables, but they're a pain in the ass.
So hold on a second. Are you adding this as number 8? You're saying, she'd want to pull down. Okay.
Yeah. I'd probably want that pull down as well, because I couldn't just use cables or dumbbells, because cables or dumbbells don't change how much they weigh over the course of a rep. I need something where it's plate loaded and it's arcing, because it's a relationship between the force, the resistance from the plates and the axis of the machine are changing. And as a result, how much the machine is pulling on my hands is changing depending on which positions I'm in. And so that again comes back to this, like, I have tools for applying resistance out here, right? The reason I'm going to choose certain ones is their ability to apply resistance differently from just a set of cables. So yeah, you're doing a much better job of keeping count than I am. So we're on.
You've got 2 left.
I've got 2 left. I would probably, I'd probably go for a lateral raise. Yeah, that's a self thing. I just, wish I had better shoulders. So I like doing lots of lateral raise variations, and you can put your body in different positions and hit different heads of your deltoids. And the problem is not many people make them really well. We just did a level 2 RTS course in Singapore, and they had an old Nautilus where because the old Nautiluses are belt, right? They're not a cable running through this groove. They're a belt sat on a flat cam. It means that you can manipulate the cam itself, right? You can shove stuff in between the belt and the metal of the cam that's rotating around, and it changed the distance between the belt that's producing force and the axis of the machine. So if you try and manipulate that on something where you've got a cable running through a groove, if you try and put anything between the two, the cable just slips off. But if you've got a flat belt, you can shove stuff in there and it's still just going to roll pretty smoothly. So I took their Nautilus lateral raise, and again, this was something that Tom taught me how to do, and put a bunch of essentially like magnetic stuff in between the belt and the cam, so that it suddenly got way harder at the bottom than it was, and then it got really light at the top, where you get weak at abducting your shoulder, right? And that turned it into a lovely bit of kit.
So we're talking about the standing rotating handle.
Yeah, yeah, just a pad against the side of your arm, lateral raise.
Sorry, you mentioned the pad. Yeah, okay. No, the ones here are the standing handle ones.
Sorry, I tell you who I'd get that from. I get that from Jim Lecco.
Okay.
Their lateral raise, really nice.
Yeah, I've had the. Oh, so it's seated pad as well. You're talking about. I've only used one, and it was at Gold's, and I think it was just like a pre-core one.
Yeah, but as in you're sat there and you've got your arms against pads and you're just raising them and putting them back down, right?
Yeah.
I mean, there's plenty of companies make them. Very few companies. it's like, why did I build this, right? Why did I build this as opposed to just using a dumbbell? It's because I want it to be heavy at the bottom and light at the top, and a dumbbell's the other way around. And then they've done that a little bit. It's not 0 at the bottom like a dumbbell is, but they've given it nowhere near enough juice at the bottom usually.
Yeah.
Jim Laco though, and it can't be intentional because they haven't got the profiles right on all sorts of other stuff. So they've got them accidentally really nice on a couple of things. Like their chest press, especially if I could edit it to make some adjustments to it, their converging plate-loaded chest press is incredible. The profile on that thing, sweet. The only problem is that there's no range limiter on it, and it keeps getting heavier the further and further you go back. So if you miss your the end of your range or the spot where you're meant to start going back in the other direction, and you've got this weight moving through space at the back, right, with a fair bit of inertia behind it. If you miss that spot, it keeps getting heavier. So you're buggered if you miss your spot. And I think they've got a foot thing, but you don't want to have your foot up just in case on every rep, right?
No. Well, that will affect your stability to an extent for a lot of people. Yeah.
Yeah, but that aside, and maybe if I had a training partner, or maybe if I could build something, on your pendulum here, you've got that rod that comes up the back that can affect how deep it can go. Yeah. Well, you could put something like that on the back of this chest press, and then you'd have a dreamy chest press. So let's slap that in at number 10.
Wow.
And so Jim Leco can bring up the rear with 9 and 10 with their lateral raise and their chest press. And here we go. So
I haven't tried a single piece of this equipment, annoyingly. Pisses me off. I would love to do that eventually here. I would love to just spend what sounds like would probably be $250,000 once you ordered it all and got it all shipped here.
You could probably estimate that. No, man. It's 10 grand a piece, I'd say.
The freight would be horrendous.
Oh, and especially because I've chosen 8 different companies to order them from as well.
Yeah. I reckon you'd be looking at 200 grand probably at least. Like once the freight would be probably overall on its own 50 grand plus. I imagine. I would think anyway, because even just ordering like barbells and shit in the past, the freight on them is insane. I know people who have sent them and it's expensive. So yeah, I had a barbell here recently. I'll give you a little shout out to Achievement Apex. I wish I could have showed you. I just happened to get rid of it before you got here, but his barbell designs are really interesting, and I'll try to maybe put something together and send over to you so you can have a look at them.
Sweet.
The whip in them is incredible. What he makes them out of, he's really, really passionate about like the bearings they use in them. The knurling is the most aggressive knurling that you've ever felt in your life. One guy at GPC States was squatting with it when they held one of the last ones at Rushi's gym, and he tipped it over himself because he failed the rep, and they had to brush the skin off the bar because it took the whole back of his scalp off.
I mean, personally, as a non-competitive powerlifter, more aggressive is not necessarily better for me from an early perspective.
Oh no, it's more of a design appreciation thing, because even for me, right, I'm like, oh my God, that would tear my hands up. But from a perspective of people are trying to lift as heavy as they can on it,
and push the limits, right? Of how we design things and what we do with them.
Yeah, and just to see the whip on them, I'll show you the whip. There was a guy we talked about him the other day named Ventislav. He's came over for a competition here and pulled on it, but he's pulled 500 on it twice. Like as in he did a double with 500 kilos. I'll show you the video. It's wild. It's incredible. Yeah.
Wow.
But yeah, I mean, look, I wish we started the podcast with just the 10 exercises and didn't talk about anything else, because I would have loved to explore some of that more, because that was actually really interesting, and more interesting than just what 10 exercises would you choose? Because otherwise it's like bicep curl, tricep extension, and it's still interesting to an extent because you'll pick a variation. But considering what you do and what RTS is about and Tom's background and everything, the machine stuff is more interesting, because that's probably what people want to hear, right? All right, machine lovers, resistance specialists, what's the best machine? What should I buy?
It's I think it's also something that was pretty easy for me to go through, because I'm currently attempting to do something that I'm hoping I managed to pull off by about May, where I'm not aware of anyone ever having created a modern industry's guide to the best bits of kit on the market. And when I say best, right, I'm saying the bits of kit with the most conducive resistance profile, with the most adjustability to them, with the most sort of logical angles of the pads related to stuff like that. So, and again, I probably won't go into it too much in the guide, but I think it'd be kind of cool if there was just, the top three, as it were, of each piece of equipment that people might want to buy. Because I think I get contacted a lot by people that go, yeah, I know you're a big geek about this stuff, and there's a lot of this RTS stuff that I've learned over the years about this stuff from Tom, and then there's the fact that I was a mechanical engineer as a profession, right? So this stuff kind of clicks with me, and I spent a lot of years designing things that move. They just weren't gym equipment. So I've kind of got a really strong and very nerdy appreciation for these kinds of things. And also, I'm an absolute mess. I'm that fragile person that we were kind of talking about at the beginning. And then I just chose really aggressive sports to play for most of my life. So the end outcome is that loads of my joints suck. And finding bits of kit that allow me to train until my eyes bleed while at the same time not having any pain at the end of it is really fun. And it makes me that pathetic sensitivity also gives me like a really good gauge as to how well something is achieving this stimulus to tax ratio, which, to my mind, from an efficiency perspective, is kind of what I'm using equipment for, right? A piece of equipment is a more efficient means of achieving the outcome that we could have just done with dumbbells. But why didn't we do it with dumbbells? Well, because, it was only difficult for a small portion of it, and maybe the loading direction wasn't ideal for what the joint enjoys, and all these kinds of factors that are making us go, actually, that might be more efficient. So,
and also because we can, in some cases we should, but not in all of them.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Well, I thank you for letting us explore your list, and I'm sure we all look forward to seeing that manual if you want.
Yeah,
if you want. Yeah, when that
buyer's
comes out.
guide or whatever it would be.
Buyer's guide. Yeah. Well, I think we all wish we'd had some of those in certain situations. I know that we'll hopefully have some here one day, and then who knows? Maybe in 5 years I'll have all this kit in the gym, and you can come back and we can talk about it and laugh about this conversation. Unlikely that I will have that much money, but you never know. I appreciate your time, and I appreciate you being here over the weekend. And as always, it was great to chat to you, Benny. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me on again. I'm flattered that the first marathon version of these that we didn't put you off, and that you were keen to have me back. So, or you were at least polite enough to imply that it wasn't too much of an endurance for you to go again.
No, well, I'm not gonna. Yeah, there's so many jokes I could have made then, but look, for me, it's about connecting with people, and always has been. Especially that's why the podcast side of things, and I just think for me, I'm going a lot on as I get older how I feel about people and like how I feel around people, and I think that the motivation and the kind of ambition and drive that I feel after watching you teach or being around you or speaking with you is rare these days, because not a lot of people are that passionate about something or really as open-minded or have like a nature about them that can make you feel that way. I would say I run a lot more into people that maybe make me feel the opposite. So, your energy is refreshing. And I think that almost everyone in the course when I did it, and even these guys today, you can tell people transform over the weekend in terms of just like the way they act, because they're just like, oh my God, like I feel so motivated, like I'm going to conquer the world when they leave. And that's something that amongst the social media and all the other crap we have in this world now isn't very apparent these days. I think a lot of people actually lack that purpose-driven kind of feeling that we all get from like maybe movies when we're 10 years old. We're like, I'm going to be an astronaut or whatever the fuck people want. I never wanted to be an astronaut. It scared the shit out of me.
Yeah.
Who knows? Maybe I want to be focused on resistance and I guess things that I never even would have thought I'd been interested in, because I probably ignored it all in school. And now I've got old enough and want to pay attention to it. My teachers would probably slap me if I told them I was interested now. Yeah. But look, man, thank you very much. And I'm sure we will do one of these one day. Hopefully, maybe one day over in Malaysia or something when I come over for level 2. That'd
be sweet.
It would be.
Anyway, I appreciate the outro, and I feel the same, which is why I've enjoyed being back at Total Physique Performance once again, and it's been a great experience every time, and I'm looking forward to more.